But good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the November TLMI printTHINK webinar series. My name is Paul Teachout with Harper Corporation of America, and I am a member of the TLMI Technical Committee and co-chair of the printTHINK subcommittee. And the TLMI printTHINK webinars have been designed to deliver knowledge of current industry trends and innovations. The technical committee divides its activities within subcommittees to provide targeted, valuable content to all TLMI members. And today, we're happy to share a recap of the 2023 Labelexpo show from those who had a chance to see it firsthand. A couple quick housekeeping items. All questions can be directed at any time via the questions tab at the bottom of your screen. And all the questions are going to be answered at the end of the webinar. The webinar will be recorded and available to all TLMI membership later this week on our website. And don't forget about our upcoming events. Next month, we'll be at the Virgin Hotel in Nashville for our annual committee summit, where all and everyone is welcome to come and share and participate. So if you have a passion in the industry that you really want to share knowledge about, then please feel free to join our committee summit, where you can join any committee that you feel will follow your passion. And in March of 2024, we'll be attending the beautiful Cloisters Hotel in Sea Island, Georgia, for our annual converters meeting. And you can visit the TLMI website for all registration details of these upcoming events. So our host today is going to be no other than Chelsea McDougall she's the group managing editor of Labels and Labeling magazine and very intimately involved with the Labelexpo show and the entire series. So Chelsea and her esteemed guest panel are now going to share their Labelexpo adventure with us. And I'm going to turn things over to Chelsea for proper introductions and get this show rolling, literally. So Chelsea, and to the entire panel, thank you all for helping us prepare this. And we're looking forward to a very insightful few minutes here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul, so much for that introduction. Yes, I'm Chelsea, the Group Managing Editor of Labels and Labeling. I have a little presentation, so thank you for bearing with us as we're kind of sorting out some of these tech issues here. Let me know if you are able to see my screen. That should say Labelexpo Europe. Yep, okay, I'm getting a nod from Steve. Great, thanks so much, guys. Thank you, thank you. So yeah, again, I'm Chelsea, the Group Managing Editor of Labels and Labeling magazine. Traveled to Brussels for the Labelexpo Europe show. It was the first Labelexpo Europe since 2019. So with COVID and everything, it had been delayed a few times, but we were back in Brussels in September from the 11th through the 14th. And if you've been to Brussels before, you recognize this Autonium picture outside that welcomes visitors outside the expo hall. But it was kind of a bittersweet event. It is the last Labelexpo that will be taking place in Brussels. As many of you probably heard, it's moving to Barcelona in 2025. So really excited about that show, but a little bit bittersweet is the last time we will be in Brussels. But as I mentioned, our editorial team was there all 4 days of the show. So be sure to read issue 4 of the magazine, which of Labels and Labeling. It should be hitting desks in about a few weeks, where we have a full recap. But today, as for today, just a little roadmap. We're going to talk about the show stats, give you a little idea of what we were looking at in Brussels, and just a high-level overview of the key trends. I also want to talk a little bit briefly about Labelexpo Americas 2024, and then a Q&A with some speakers that were at the event. So, okay, diving into it. So there was 637 exhibitors at this Labelexpo Europe, and of that, 96% rebooked for Barcelona in 2025. So what that means is there were 637 exhibitors, 96 said, we want to come and do this again in Barcelona. So that's just really showing kind of the excitement for the event and for the Barcelona show. So going into Brussels, we knew it was going to be a really busy show because there was more than 200 product launches that we knew about going in. So just really quite exciting there. And over 35,000 visitors. If you compare that to Labelexpo Americas gets about 14,000 exhibitors, just to kind of give you an idea of like the sheer size of the Labelexpo show. Over 36,000 square meters, covering 9 halls. And Labelexpo Europe is really an international global packaging show. 138 countries were represented. The top European countries, of course, Germany, Italy, France, UK, Spain, Netherlands, of course, Belgium. There were a few from the US who I'm delighted to have you introduce you to them in a little bit. But interestingly, obviously a few from Asian countries, but really interesting to me was quite a few from Latin American countries that took that really long flight over to the Europe show to see what was going on there. So again, we'll hear from some US label converting companies and TLMI members who were in Brussels. So these are just kind of the top trends that our editorial team kind of picked up at the show. There's automation was a big deal. Flexible packaging is a key trend we keep hearing about. Sustainability really was on the mouths and the minds of every label supplier, every material supplier at the show. The big news, Flexo was back. We saw, and they came back in a big way. So really, really exciting to see them back. And I want to talk too about what we're calling this digitized production environment. So the first trend was automation, and automation was undoubtedly a hot topic at Labelexpo Europe. We're seeing what we're calling kind of a technological peak between both Flexo and digital printing technology. So with that, there's this heavy emphasis now on automation and integration in between the two technologies. Labelexpo hosted an automation arena during the show. There was 10 live demos and each one was jam-packed. So at the demos, visitors were able to see a fully automated workflow from file creation all the way to turret rewind and automated shipping, all without manual intervention. So it was really interesting feature area at the show this year. And another thing I wanted to point out too is that automation is really not just about hardware. I think people tend to think automation and think hardware, but really a lot of the conversations that we were having with exhibitors and with people at the show was really centered on how it's all integrated across the entire production chain. And here's where data and data collection really is king. So I mentioned Flexo's back. So it was really great to see so much Flexo technology at Labelexpo Europe this year. This was after the so-called death of Flexo talk that we heard after the Americas show last year. I mean, there was a number of reasons why they weren't at the Americas show, but they came back to the Europe show and they came back in a big way. They brought state-of-the-art technology that was really showcasing incredibly high levels of automation and surrounded by an ecosystem that makes them more efficient and more sustainable. We saw presses run by a single operator, presses that were showing job changes in mere minutes, or even kind of on-the-fly exchange of print cylinders. We saw automated pressure and registration settings, monitoring and data collection throughout the entire stage. So really just high-end presses here. One of my favorite quotes in the Labels and Labeling article on this came from a press manufacturer who said, quote, "The only conventional thing about these presses is that we use plates and analogs. They're more like robot systems that are run from any point by a single operator." So really the conventional presses that we saw at Labelexpo this year were truly remarkable as we move into more of this digitized production environment, which I keep talking about. So let me get to it. So when I talk about a digital production environment, I'm not just talking about digital presses here, although it really was a fantastic showing from digital press manufacturers this year. They were really pushing the boundaries of speed and productivity, oftentimes rivaling their Flexo counterparts. But what I mean by digital production environment is this entire ecosystem of factory integration where data is king. Again, data kind of was everything. That was the big conversation this year. So exhibitors were showing that by linking a Flexo press to a cloud-based workflow, they were capable of sending real-time production information to a remote server where it could be accessed from anywhere for a job analysis across a wide range of data points. So you could get data from your dies and your tools, and you know when to replace and when to change them. Data from the plate room, so you know when to destroy your plates or keep what plates. Data from anything from downtime to average speed, ink consumption, material waste. Really, it seems that they're tracking everything. And all of this really is to help businesses identify points of weakness in your work practice and really just increase that overall efficiency of the converting operation. So that was quite interesting to see. And then flexible packaging. So this probably won't be a shock to a lot of people, but just as converters are diversifying, Labelexpo shows are kind of continuing to evolve into a package printing show. So nowhere was this more evident than on the show floor. with these major press OEMs and material suppliers showcasing innovations that target this lucrative market. So we saw presses that are getting wider and moving toward that mid-web sweet spot of 26 inches, and that sweet spot that's capable of handling shrink sleeves, flexible packaging in molds. Of course, digital printing continues to be an entry point to FlexPack for many label converters looking at the market. But we also saw a host of conventional presses getting wider and getting faster. So, and complementing that technology on the show floor, there was a sold out flexible packaging masterclass hosted by the Label Academy. So sold out and then some. We made some space for people. So that really just kind of shows the appetite there is for education in this sector. But there also was a flexible packaging trail feature area, and there's where visitors were able to kind of take this deep dive into both digital and conventional technologies, FlexPack material constructions, coating, laminating, and really just so much more. So FlexPack, definitely a hot topic. And then finally, we had sustainability. This definitely won't be a surprise to anyone on this call today, but it was really on the minds and the mouths of the material suppliers in the segment. So eco-consciousness really dominated the show floor in this segment. And this in light of fast approaching circular economy legislation and also demands from consumers in really all parts of the world. So a central theme across exhibitor stands was the incorporation, of post-consumer recycled materials that explore fossil fuels as alternatives in the production of the label stock. Linerless was a really big trend. And all of this is towards this industry-wide push towards a more circular economy. So last slide from me before we meet our illustrious panel, but I did want to remind everyone that Labelexpo Americas 2024 is coming up. We're back at the Donald E. Stephens Center in Rosemont, September 10th through the 12th. Speaking of sustainability, TLMI is back again with its hugely popular Eco Stage. They did it in the 2022 show, and it was really popular, and they're bringing it back again. 3 days of content on sustainability, so look out for that. And then Flexo is back, guys, so I know a lot of people will be excited to hear that, but major conventional OEMs, they're signing on, they're in talks to come back to the Americas show. Also, in addition, some really cutting edge feature areas that everyone would come to know and expect from Labelexpo, an automation arena in kind of a different form. We'll be back at the Americas show, also doing special features on FlexPack, smart technologies, and of course, the 2-day conference program, in addition to some other learning opportunities from the Label Academy masterclasses. So yeah, we will see you in Rosemont next fall. Can't believe it. So before I turn it over to our panelists, I just want to kind of briefly introduce them. Each of these gentlemen took time away from their businesses, invested time and money and effort into getting over to Brussels to see the show. And so we have with us today, we have Clay Davis, the CEO of Stouse. We have Robert Crane, the Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Crane Communications, and Steve Stockman, the Director of Supply Chain at Fortis Group. So I'm going to end the show here, pop everybody back up so we can kind of see. And my slideshow. Okay. And do we have all the panelists? You can see everybody? Or am I still sharing? Stop share.
Yep.
All right, thanks. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Thank you.
Great. So I think it would be good if we just kind of quickly went around the room and everybody explained, just did a brief introduction of your company, where you're based, and who you are. So we'll start with you, Clay.
Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are. It's I'm out on the West Coast, so happy to be here today. Really appreciate the invitation. I'm President and CEO of Stouse. So Stouse is a Kansas City based trade printer, and then we're also in the prime label space with facilities in Portland, Oregon, and in Vermont. And made the trip over, and delighted to talk about it today.
Great. Thank you, Clay, for being here. Steve, we'll move on to you.
Good afternoon. Steve Stockman, Director of Supply Chain for Fortis. Been with the company about 8 years now, and love being a part of this. made the trip over, first time in Europe for me, first time to make a trip like that. And I'll be the first to say that, the heat was probably the biggest thing that we all enjoyed. And so that was probably the biggest learning. But, Fortis Solutions Group is a, printer, flex pack, shrink, folding carton, pressure sensitive labels across about 21 locations in the US and one in Canada.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Stephen. He mentioned the heat. I'm sure everyone on this call may have heard about the heat if they hadn't, but the first day of Labelexpo was quite a steamy one, cooled off by the end of it. But that first day was a little bit challenging to navigate. There was a record heat in Brussels during the week. We happened to be there, but it's funny. Okay. And Robert, on to you.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, Robert Crane, and our company is Crane Consumables. I'm Vice President of Sales and Marketing. We're located in the Cincinnati, Ohio area, and our focus is blank labels, and we focus on the trade, working with partners that to reach the end user customers. And yeah, I was at Labelexpo for 2 days, so I only got the heat, but I heard it got much nicer for the rest of you.
It definitely did. Well, so I'll lob the first question to you, Robert. Tell me a little bit about your travel to Brussels. It's a significant investment in time and money. Kind of what led to your decision to visit the Europe show?
For us, it was important that we stay on top of technology, right? I mean, it's ever changing, whether it has to do with equipment or the digital side of our business, how we interact with customers. So for us, we wanted to make sure that we were on the cutting edge of automation, finding out what best practices are. And for me, it's an opportunity to talk to other converters from around the world and really hear what they're doing, what their struggles are, and see what's different, what's the same as far as what we're doing in the US.
Yeah, great. And now I really want to ask this same question to each of you, because I bet you all had sort of different reasons and motivations for going. So Clay, to you, what kind of led to your decision to visit the Europe show this year?
I guess my answer would be very similar to Robert's. Primarily, they're looking at capital equipment. So we've been a significant investor in printing and finishing assets the last couple of years and continue to do so. So that was a primary reason for attending, looking at some very specific equipment. Echo the sentiment about engaging with our peer group companies in Europe is fascinating, and the relationships that you can build there, and the learning is very rich. And then the other comment is, because a lot of our equipment manufacturers are European based, it's an opportunity to get to know their senior level executives who typically attend the European show in greater numbers than the Americas show. So I consider that, those relationships to be important and valuable, and that's a good time to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steve,
Yeah,
same question to you.
Absolutely. Probably articulating the same way, but we wanted to see the full range of the new technology that Labelexpo USA doesn't provide, seeing it comprehensively across all the platforms in one location. You could go booth to booth to booth, go back. What about this? Go, in one place you could see and touch and feel the actual equipment running and see things that are developing. You mentioned the, development of the new product launches. So being able to see those and come back and touch them. So that was a real reason why we wanted, was the comprehensive line of the vendors. And then also, coming out of the allocations, the constraints, the last 2 years of supply chain challenges, our need to connect with suppliers and find information farther downstream was really important, so that we can start to make those connectivities, those points, and provide, that we didn't have before, typically when you're only dealing with your, local US suppliers. So, getting farther down the supply chain linkage was important for us.
Yeah, that's interesting. Now, Steve, remind me, was that your first Labelexpo Europe, or had you been?
Correct. No, never been outside of the US for any type of travel. So it was my first trip across the pond, so to speak, and the long flight and the jet lag and all those things that go with travel was a first time for me.
Oh, interesting. Okay. And then the show, I guess, what were you expecting from it? And did that sort of experience match your experience at the show? Did it match what you were expecting?
Yeah, the only thing I hadn't been told was it was big, so plan on big, but you know, what you plan on big and what you actually get there when you see 9 exhibit halls or 11 exhibit halls, whatever it is, and you're walking and walking. It just, until you go, you can't appreciate and understand what goes on. And to really get the scope of how big this industry is when we start talking about worldwide, it is a great, you know, opportunity to put it all together and connect the dots, that, you know, the European, the Asian communities and the vendor base and just everything that goes on to it really makes it, you know, feel like you're part of something a lot bigger than just what you see at Labelexpo America.
That's a great point. I mean, a lot of times we kind of get in our bubble, right? You know, we think like, you know, our issues are the biggest thing that's happening because it's right in front of us. But yeah, when you're at a show like that, you realize that the industry is much bigger and kind of really touches every corner of the globe. So, which is one of the best parts of this industry, I think. So getting to that, Clay, you said that one of your favorite things is that you really you liked kind of learning from the European counterparts. Was there any kind of takeaways, any key messages, any big lessons you learned from that? Anything interesting?
I think for me, the most fascinating conversations were around automation, and I'll admit wanting to kind of direct conversations toward that topic because it's very, very front and center for us. And I do think it seemed to me that there's been a much more a significant amount of progress made with European label converters in that area than in the US.
Okay.
And I wouldn't necessarily have thought that in advance of some of the conversations that took place, but kind of it's I'll say up to my sense of urgency on that topic for what's possible.
Yeah, interesting. So was there anything that kind of caught your eye either on the show floor and conversations with people about automation specifically, like what maybe you could implement at your facilities?
It's hard for me to answer the question without mentioning specific manufacturers, which I just would prefer not to because
I
we're
understand
with many of them. But I'll say I would say focus in the finishing area for sure.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we saw a lot of that, particularly in the automation arena, was interesting as well. What about you, Robert? Was there anything that kind of caught your eye? Any lessons you learned from our European counterparts?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Clay said, it was being a blank house primarily, finishing's our primary focus, right? So for us, it was, you mentioned the packaging lines, taking product off the turrets, put them in boxes without having a person have to touch them. The biggest thing that I would say takeaway was everyone's struggling with the same problems with people. And we're going to continue to have these problems. I think everyone saw that at TLMI in our meeting just a month ago, that we're going to continue to have these problems, and we have to invest in equipment to make them more valuable, to pay them better, and to make sure that we can operate with the same workforce we have. So for us, it was finishing with, you know, how do you automate changeover times faster? How do you automate turrets faster? How do you automate the packaging lines faster? And seeing that they're in the same position that we're in is encouraging, in the sense that we're all kind of struggling with the same issues. So solutions will come out of it, and we'll all benefit from it.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think a lot of label converters are pushing suppliers in that direction too, and saying like, we can't throw more people at this because we don't have any more people to throw at this. So like, how can you help us? And that's really kind of pushing the entire industry to kind of respond to that, it seems like.
Right. And it was also fascinating to see the diversity of equipment manufacturers. You know, in the US, we think, you know, there's 4 or 5, 6 maybe that we're all familiar with. And walking the show over there, walking the halls, there's manufacturers that I'd never heard of that had a presence in Europe or in Asia or around the world for years. And neat to see what products they offered, if they could be compatible with the US market, and really just taking ideas from everyone and seeing what we can bring back.
Yeah. And what about you, Steve?
It was fun to, along the same lines, what Robert was saying, some of those suppliers in Europe are trying to make connections in the US. They're building distributorship, or they're, you know, a linkage, whatever, in here. So being able to be on the leading edge or cutting edge, or making those connectivity with some of them that want to come and bring their products into the US was important for me to be able to build that database of touch points and database of suppliers that have information or have tools that we can benefit from at a later date, just to be prepared and ready for that. And for me, actually, one of the biggest takeaways was the ability to walk the show floor without being interrupted and talked to by everybody, because nobody knew me, So in the US, when we go from booth to booth, or you go from, you're always running into somebody that knows you. Hey, can I have 5 minutes of your time? Can I set up a meeting for this? So for me, it was a show that, I could walk the floor and be, unknown and ask questions, and nobody.
For now, Steve, for now.
For now. Exactly. So it was just surprising to be able to do that without, being interrupted.
Well, wait till they see this webinar, Steve. You're going to be signing autographs after this. Oh, but no, that's interesting. So were you able to make connections with new vendors then, and have maybe potential sources for, potentially buying new products?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. A good.
Echoing a point you said earlier, Steve, it was the raw material suppliers, right? We all were kind of on allocation to a point where our hands were tied, and coming out of that, you were able to meet new vendors and see, maybe not necessarily execute anything, but you have those sources available if you need them, and you can start to develop the relationships.
Yeah, and it's not as much a matter of even trying to bypass the suppliers that are calling on us to be, the ones here in the US. Not at all that. It's just, we need information to go to our customers that they're asking for. So the ability to reach out farther downstream just to get information, data, trends. It's not about, pricing or even development or R&D stuff. It's just being better armed so that we can go into our customers with as much information as we possibly can that allows that to happen.
Yeah. Interesting. And then what about, Steve, was there any, we mentioned the automation was the really big trend. Was there any other kind of key takeaways, key trends that you saw from the show floor? I guess, Steve, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I had a coworker with me who's a VP of manufacturing, and he was certainly more looking at the equipment side than I was. But his point was that inkjet is really starting to stabilize, where you don't have to get outdated in 24 to 36 months with the system. So, the ability to use it, trust it, be comfortable with it, and not, as soon as you get it, you install it, you get out and learn it. And by the way, now the next version's in and you're outdated. So the stability of the inkjet printability was something we saw that was helpful.
Interesting. What about you, Clay? Any other key trends that you picked out?
I think you highlighted this in your presentation as well, the automation and I'll say ease of operator use with flexo presses was something I paid attention to as well, which for pretty much all of us continuing to operate flexographic presses, the issue of training up the next generation of workforce is increasingly a challenge. So more modern machines that ultimately make it more plug and play and more similar to a digital press to operate was interesting. And Steve, I echo your comments on the UV inkjet space, and that was primarily there seeing and with speeds and economics starting to approach flexography. It's that was a highlight for me.
Yeah. And Robert, what to you? Any
similar to the automation, but I would say kind of automation outside of the manufacturing side. A lot of information, a lot of development in the scheduling of jobs, or the preparation of jobs. That and the automating the interaction with customers, and kind of touching on the point that Clay just made about making it so you can ease of operation for operators, but also ease of operation for your customers and for your team. So scheduling jobs or pre-production data, that stuff can flow automatically. The steps that we're constantly doing manually over and over and over again, the computers can now do those steps for us, or some of the interactions that the customers are calling for, you can put online. So I think interactions with the customers and interactions with pre-production have gotten a lot better.
Yeah, yeah. Lots of AI in that space too, it seems like. Lots of really cool innovations coming from there.
And honestly, that's a great way that we are continuing to attract workforce and keep our workforce engaged. You put computers at every press. All of a sudden, they're not just a manufacturer. They're doing something with technology, and it kind of makes the job a step up, and it makes it more interesting for them.
Yeah, yeah. Now, Robert, was there I don't know if you could say, but was there anything kind of specific that you were going to look at? Maybe any piece of machinery, technology, software, anything specific you can talk about?
Specifically, I kind of briefly talked about a second ago, Labeltracks, which is the software we use. They've introduced a system called Batched, which is a AI-based scheduling system that we've started to add to our own operation, and it's been terrific. So systems like that, where the jobs come into the system, they automatically get scheduled to presses. It saves you 24, 48 hours of pre-press time. And for me, that was a big investment. So I went over to their booth and talked to them about what else they have going on. And then outside of that, for us, it's turrets, trim systems, and butt splicers. We have pretty good equipment in the middle of it, but it's how do you keep your press running at the start, and how do you keep your press running at the end, and keeping them running fast. So that was what I was most interested in.
Yeah. I see Steve over there nodding. So Steve, is there anything that you were kind of interested in seeing at the show?
No, Robert mentioned AI, we talk about computers, we talk about robotics. I mean, it was a show that clearly, leads us to being, a dealing with the lack of labor. We talked about that earlier, the labor force being harder to get and retain, keep engaged. What do we keep them challenged at? So AI, computers, the touch screens, all of those things that our presses are running with. You could see it in all the areas, front to end, pre-press to job batching, to running the press, to finishing equipment, to even, analyzing the data. You mentioned that in your presentation. The importance of data is that much more critical when we start looking at how do we use this stuff in a economic way. What do we invest in? Well, you got to have the data to justify those things. So just tying all of that together in one 4-day event with everybody there that you could touch was a big takeaway.
Yeah. And now I always kind of think half the fun of a Labelexpo is walking around and finding those little things that you're like, wait, I didn't know that existed, or that's new to me, or that was something I wasn't expecting to see. So was there any of that? Maybe Clay, was there anything that kind of caught your eye as you were walking the show floor?
Yeah, I would say fully integrated short run solutions for short run, highly customized labels. We operate e-commerce platforms, so finding ways to produce custom shapes and sizes in small quantities as efficiently as possible is of great interest to us. Saw some equipment, some European based, some Asian based. I'll say very, very economical and somewhat innovative, especially with laser finishing. That was unique. I had not seen that before, and subsequently we are having some calls and exploring some of the options that we found.
Oh, great news. Great. And what about you, Robert? Anything interesting kind of caught your eye? Anything new?
Yeah, I'll echo some of Clay's points regarding some of equipment manufacturers that maybe you didn't know were out there that have some economical options to help automate what we're doing. But for me, one of the surprising things about it, or nice things about it, was I was actually able to have meetings with 4 of our major paper suppliers within hours of each other. So unplanned, just happened to be in their booth and they were there. So it was convenient to be able to ask the same sort of questions and discuss the same topics when everything was fresh in my mind, and kind of gauge what their responses were and kind of what their interactions or their perspectives on the industry were. So from that point, we talked about so many vendors there, but it was great that they were all there in one space, 30, 50 feet, sometimes 100 feet from each other. And we were able to have touch points with all of them.
Oh, that's great. Well, it sounds like you really made use of your days there then, especially if it's, back-to-back meetings all in one day. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And then what about you, Steve? Anything interesting or new caught your eye?
Yeah, I mean, probably the coolest thing was just some of the robotics that were there and what they're able to do and program. So, I mean, that was fun to watch and it was interesting. But probably for me in my role, being able to talk to the European counterparts of the companies that we deal with in the US to get their perspective on how they see the market, where are their challenges that we're dealing with. And Robert touched on, I think earlier, we're all in the same boat when you get down to some of the same struggles that we're dealing with, but to just hear their perspective on material shortages or allocations or pricing or freight, you name your topic, hearing it from another source other than the ones we talk to every day here in the US was just encouraging. It was really good to be able to bounce those ideas off of it. So that was probably the coolest thing.
Yeah, yeah. So before we still have a little bit of time left, about 5 minutes or so, but I do want to just mention that the chat is open. I've got the window open. If anybody has any questions for our panel, just type them in there and I should be able to see it. But I guess what would be, so we have the Labelexpo Americas show coming up, right? And our suppliers, I'm sure, are listening and watching this webinar and interested to hear your takeaway. But what would you hope to see at the Americas show? What do you want your our label suppliers, vendors to bring to the Americas show?
I'll start, and you mentioned it earlier, just return of Flexo. Like, we want Flexo presses back. We want to be able to see them, touch them, feel them, because they were certainly absent from the last show. So that was one of the things, is just being able to see the equipment, touch the equipment, ask questions, not only digital, but hybrid to flex, whatever it might be, whatever the product line is. So, and then also just the energy that the show in Europe generated was encouraging. Just to be able to, make it fun again, make it a growth and a challenge. So there was a lot of energy in Europe that I hope we could get in the US.
Yeah, and I think we will. I think what we tend to see is like things are launched at the Europe show, then brought to the US. So I think the US show is going to be a really interesting one this year, given the amount of innovations we saw at the Europe show. But what about you, Clay? What would you ask your vendors to do for the Americas show?
For equipment manufacturers, have as much equipment there as you possibly can, preferably up and running in full demonstration mode, and have as many of your technical experts with whom we can engage, and as many of your senior folks as well, to help us build relationships. The more is better than less.
Yeah.
For us, in my opinion, it's so efficient for us to see all of that in one place. So I hope our manufacturer partners see it that way, that they have a good return on their undoubtedly significant investment in these shows.
Yeah, agree. I think the times of kind of, here we are sitting on a virtual panel, but I think seeing equipment, you see it, kick tires, peek under the hood, as Paul Teachout calls it, see the roller coaster at the event, see the equipment in person. It's so much different than seeing it over maybe a video or a virtual thing. People like to see it in person. And Robert, what about you? What would you say to that? What would you hope people
No,
bring?
I'll echo that same point, but also some of the international suppliers that we may not have known before, to see if they're there. So for me, if they're not just a fly-by-night company that has longevity and actually has legitimacy, if they want to enter the US market, to see them come to the US show, I think would speak volumes to that, because they talked a good game during the Labelexpo Europe, but we'll see if they're there next year, or they're there in 2 years in Barcelona. To me, that's a big thing.
That's interesting. So, and that kind of goes back to that building that relationship that you were working on when you were there. Okay, interesting. And we just have a few minutes. So I guess what would any kind of big takeaways from the show? I know we talked kind of big picture about a lot of these things, but any other big takeaways?
For me, it was great to be able to see other partners that I've worked with in the past that maybe I hadn't seen in a couple of years due to COVID or whatever reasons. Either people from the United States, like Steve and I happened to be on the same flight, but other individuals who I work with from around the US or globally that I was able to meet up with was it was a great experience to kind of touch base with them and see how their businesses are doing.
Yeah, yeah.
No,
Clay,
I would just
Steve?
encourage people to go. I mean, if you ever get the chance, you know, even in Chicago or to, I know there's a South American show or an Asia show or whatever, like if you get the opportunity and it works out, you know, certainly go once, enjoy it. The culture, the experience was different, certainly. But you know, as Robert said, just those connectivities and those relationships and and what you take back, you know, you can't get virtually. You have to get it in person.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And Clay, what about-
I encourage everyone to go to. It's just it's a different perspective than the US show. Also, for me, if I'm making the trip to piggyback and as I did on this trip and go and see one of our European-based equipment manufacturers at their facility and not too far away is another nice nice thing to be able to do while over there. So would encourage that as well.
Yeah, yeah. I have a feeling Barcelona is going to be pretty busy. It's a beautiful location and a beautiful new venue hall that we're hosting. So I have a feeling that one's going to be a busy event too. But again, we look forward to seeing everybody at the Donald E. Stevens Center next fall. Stay tuned to the Labelexpo channels as they start kind of you know, announcing some of the feature areas, some of the key people who will be there, and some of the main topics. But thank you all so much for your time today. Really interesting to hear your perspective of the Brussels show. Thank you again for visiting and for sharing that, your experience with our audience today. So, oh, we're getting clapped. So yes, thank you so much, guys.
Well, again, on behalf of the TLMI, thank you, gentlemen, for joining us today and sharing your experiences. And just a shout out to everybody, especially the TLMI staff, for the community that they've created to have an environment where we can have 3 converters come on a panel that are somewhat competitors, maybe different market verticals, but to be able to share their journey openly, to allow the rest of our membership to see the value of what these exhibitions are. And Labelexpo Europe is definitely the carnival that everybody likes to go to. Chelsea's right. I always call the presses the roller coasters. I love walking down the midways and seeing everything that goes on them. But there's nothing like getting to those few booths that have the big equipment in it. Like Clay mentions, the more the merrier for me. So the more the equipment's there, the more the adventure has to thrive and to enjoy. So I just say thank you on behalf of the TLMI, the technical committee, the printTHINK webinars. We had a great season this year. We look forward to seeing you all again next year at our webinars and also our upcoming events with the committee summit next month and then the converter meeting next March. So have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, and go TLMI.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye-bye.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.